Are you an almost Christian? Am I? That's the question raised by John Wesley in his sermon titled, The Almost Christian. And what do we mean by almost Christian? And how is that different from being altogether Christian? Those are the questions we're asking in this installment of Wesley Wednesday. We'll also find out that this sermon, The Almost Christian, for Wesley is deeply autobiographical because he discovered that for a long time while he was engaging in ministry and observing Christian practices, all kinds of things, that he himself was an almost Christian. My name is Dr. Matt O'Reilly. If you're new to Theology Project, take a minute to like this video, subscribe to the channel, then take a second, leave a comment, and answer the question in your own words. What is an almost Christian? Then stick around as we explore the journey from being an almost Christian to an altogether Christian. So John Wesley's sermon, The Almost Christian, is organized around two major questions. The first question is, what is an almost Christian? And Wesley has several different categories of characteristics. He has several different characteristics for what he would call an almost Christian. The first one is what he calls heathen honesty. Now remember, Wesley's writing in the 18th century, and in the 18th century, for Wesley and for others, the word honesty really means more honor, heathen honor. Well, what does he mean by heathen honor? And in what sense does someone who's almost a Christian have it? Well, for Wesley, heathen honor is self-discipline. It is a posture that pursues justice and resists injustice as an ideal. It is someone who doesn't steal from their neighbors, someone who doesn't defraud another person, who generally values the truth, who's basically a good person, who endeavors to be a good citizen, who engages in charitable behavior. If you think of the Roman Empire and this kind of Roman ideal of a virtuous person, that's what Wesley has in mind when he talks about heathen honesty. Second, he says that an almost Christian has a form of godliness. Wesley says this person does nothing that the gospel forbids. So they don't take the Lord's name in vain. They don't profane the day of the Lord. They avoid adultery. They don't lie. They're moderate persons. They avoid excess indulgence in alcohol, he says specifically. They don't seek revenge or retribution. Wesley says the almost Christian has a form of godliness and is no brawler and no scoffer. This person does not willingly hurt another person. And from the outside, this almost Christian looks like a good Christian. They do Christian practices. They just do it without an inward trust in Jesus. Third thing Wesley says about an almost Christian is that they observe the means of grace, right? So he says that this might be someone who's engaged in reading the Bible, in prayer, in family prayer and worship, someone who goes to public worship and engages in private worship. They are engaged in the means of grace. They may even go and avail themselves of the sacraments. Wesley says you can do that and still be almost a Christian. Fourth thing he says is that an almost Christian is marked by sincerity. Right? So they're not just trying to avoid punishment. They're not just thinking of salvation as kind of a get out of hell free card. There's an inward principle of religion. And he says that these actions flow out of that inward principle of religion. So there's a real sincerity. There's a real desire for sincere religious practices. It's a behavior grounded in religious principle. So that's what an almost Christian is. Then Wesley switches gears a little bit, and this is where the sermon gets interesting. He raises a question. You might be thinking, Wesley says, is it possible that anyone can do all those things and still be almost a Christian? Is that even possible? And Wesley's answer is absolutely it's possible, and the primary evidence for its possibility, Wesley says, is my life. For years and years, he says, I engaged in all of those practices, and I was but almost a Christian. So he would say, I served the poor, I visited in prisons, I read the Bible. I went and prayed with other people. I went to public worship. He was an ordained minister who went as a missionary to the American colonies in the early 18th century. And Wesley says, through all that, all this time, I was but almost a Christian. So this is a sermon where you get a real glimpse into Wesley's understanding of himself early in life, where he is attempting to be a Christian. He is doing Christian things, and he's doing them from a sense of real sincerity, like a desire to please God. And yet, Wesley says, I wasn't quite a Christian yet. So that invites the question, what is an altogether Christian? If Wesley was an almost Christian, what makes the difference now? What makes him an altogether Christian? He says there are three things that you need to pay attention for that mark or characterize the fully Christian life. And the number one thing is love for God. Christianity isn't just religious obedience. It's a full-hearted rejoicing in God, finding one's life in God. He says love for God is manifest in a heart that cries out for God, someone who delights in God. They're not just trying to please God. They're not just struggling to show God that they are worthy. Their desires, their affections are oriented towards the triune God, right? It's not just religious affection, it's full-hearted love. Second thing Wesley says marks an altogether Christian is love for neighbor. So there's a turn from self-interest to other-oriented love. So for Wesley, an altogether Christian is not one who is serving the poor out of a sense of duty, but out of a sense of full, other-oriented, selfless, self-giving love. So you can see what he's done. He's taken the two great commandments and he's defined altogether Christianity, an altogether Christian person around those two great commandments of Jesus. You'll remember in the Gospels when Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, the first is to love the Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, soul, all your strength. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. Wesley says, if that's what Jesus says is the most important thing, then that's what it means to be an altogether Christian. And then he mentions a third thing, and this probably won't surprise you. The third thing is faith. Now remember, for Wesley and in the Bible, faith is not a cognitive agreement with or assent to a list of doctrines or dogmatic teachings. It's not just some kind of something that happens in my head. For Wesley, for the Bible, faith is confidence or trust in God, confidence or trust in Jesus, that he's forgiven my sins, that I have been reconciled to God, that his spirit testifies with my spirit, that I belong to him. Wesley says faith is trusting in the merits of Christ for confidence that I've been reconciled to God. And that's not a work for Wesley. It's the rejection of works. It's saying, I don't have the merit on my own. I don't have the power on my own. I can't do this myself. I need Jesus to do for me what I cannot do for myself. So for Wesley, an altogether Christian is someone who loves God, who loves their neighbor, and who trusts Jesus and his merits, his atoning death, his life-giving resurrection for full redemption. To summarize then, for Wesley, you can do all the right things and do them sincerely according to deeply held religious principles and still be an almost Christian if those right things are not the overflow of faith motivating love for God and others, then you're almost a Christian. And Wesley knew this from experience. He's not just making this up. It's his experience illumined his reading of the scriptures, and this led him to encourage other people and to shepherd them into knowing the peace and the joy that comes from being an altogether Christian. Hey, my name is Dr. Matt O'Reilly. This is Theology Project Online. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for the next installment of Wesley Wednesday.